If you look at the G20 economies in particular and the top 10% of earners and compare that to the bottom 40%, the top 10% earn about 3.5 times what the bottom 40% do. I think there's a report out from Oxfam today that also shows the huge gap in terms of income inequality. But what do we do to get out of this situation, and how do we understand how we got into it? That's basically what this report is trying to do, trying to understand what are the drivers of relative social mobility so that a child who's born today, their future is not dependent on what their parents' current socioeconomic status is. That's what we're trying to get to, understand those 10 drivers of social mobility. And the 4 that you've just mentioned around lifelong learning, better wages, better working conditions, all of that is essentially where the world as a whole is doing extremely poorly, whether it's developed countries or developing ones.
Before we dive much deeper in this report, I just want to start with the overall idea of it, that social mobility can tackle income inequality. Because as we set up for a presidential election in the States, we've got some of the left-leaning Democrats calling for wealth taxes. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren think that wealth taxes could be the way to stop some of the inequality that we've seen over the recent years. It hasn't really been tackled between CEO salaries, the ultra-rich versus the average worker. Are you saying what you've come up with around mobility could actually be the answer, not wealth taxes?
I think there's a combination of things. So we do have to look at the tax base, which has been eroding, and in part it's been eroding because of technology, because of lower income and middle classes. A lot of the tax burden has been shifting to the people who really can't afford it. So there is that element. But I think what we found through this report is that it's not really about the overall tax numbers. It's really about how are countries spending that income, and it's about the quality of that. So for example, countries like France actually do have quite a large amount of social spending, and they're not necessarily getting the returns in certain aspects of the index. They're ranked 12th overall. In the United States, 27th in the world, the UK, 21st in the world, but then you've got countries like India and Brazil who are towards the very bottom of the indices. So I think it's really about the quality of the spending that has to improve, not so much about the overall spending that has to be done.
Talk to us about some of the countries who've gone down this pathway where there is more mobility and they have the right infrastructure in place. Because I gather there are top 5 countries and they're all Scandinavian.
Yes, they are really living sort of the Nordic dream, and in part that is because they've had a long history of this. So they actually have been valuing their human capital for the century or so. I mean, let's remember, these were fairly poor countries 100 years ago. And they actually decided to make this investment in their human capital as sort of the fundamental building block of their economies. And now they're seeing all of these returns. But it's not just about systems they put in place at that time. This is about continuing to be agile, continuing to innovate on those systems, change them because of the 4th Industrial Revolution, change them because they want a greener economy, change them because globalization and trends around trade are changing. So I think it's about that agility, not just the investment.
Your research flags up a new social protection contract, which I think is interesting as we talk about the future of the workforce. Questions been raised about the gig economy, that there is effectively more informality creeping into the workplace, so less pensions that are paid in by workers, less certainty with more short-term contracts for tech workers. How do you change the narrative on this, where there is a backdrop that provides some certainty for workers?
So there's probably sort of 3 approaches that we need to think about. One is reskilling and upskilling, and we will on Wednesday be announcing a massive initiative. It's one of the big sort of activities coming out of Davos this year, and something that we as an organization are going to be taking forward over the next decade. 1 billion people with better skills, better education, better jobs over the course of 2030. Over the course of 2020s all the way through to 2030. The second element is improving standards, and that is where last week actually we managed to get 6 big gig economy firms, including Uber, to actually put forward a set of principles that they believe, and it's been also welcomed by a lot of the unions, that in the absence of government action, these companies also have to think differently about their social responsibility. Stakeholder capitalism is a huge part of the theme here. And then the third element is safety nets from government. Without that public policy element, we simply cannot afford to get workers from job A to job B, and they will need to be looking for jobs outside of their current industries. 70% of at-risk workers have to find a role outside of their current industry, which means they don't have the networks there.
Hi, I'm Joanna Bersecci, and thank you for watching. You can check out more of our videos by clicking on the boxes on the screen. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more from CNBC International. Thank you for watching.